Let me ask you this. Have you ever been driving down the road, no traffic around you, it's a beautiful day, you're just content to be on the trip that you're on, you're looking forward to the destination you're headed towards, and you're doing great, but then suddenly a car passes you going much faster. And they're not going so fast that you look over and go, man, they're being reckless. They're just going a little bit faster, and suddenly you kind of feel like, I'm going too slow. I need to speed up a little bit. Now, I know that some of you feel this way because when I attempt to pass you, suddenly then you speed up, right? You felt content with the speed you were going until someone tried to go by you, and then it felt like you were moving too slow. How about this? Have you ever felt this way in the checkout line at the grocery store? You've got all your groceries, you're trying to pay, everything's going great, but then you look and that lane is moving a lot faster than mine. And you start to regret choosing this lane. I picked the wrong lane. That lady up there is probably going to pay with a check and it's going to take forever, you know. Where I feel this the most is in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru lane, okay? Now here's what's crazy about that, all right? Chick-fil-A has the best drive-thru. It is faster and more efficient than any other drive-thru, but there's 2 lanes. And I always seem to be in the one that goes a little bit slower than the others. It's going to be faster than any other lane that I could go through, but I'm always like, I think I want to be in that one. And I go to my Chick-fil-A, this is just confession time, I go to my Chick-fil-A enough that I know the guys who work the out there, and I know which one, oh, he's faster, I'm going in that one, okay? Because even though I'm still going to get my chicken, I don't want anybody to move through the lane faster than me. How about one more? Have you ever become convinced that you need a new phone right after they announce they're coming out with a new phone? Right? Seems like as soon as they announce there's a new iPhone coming out, mine just runs slower. And I'm almost convinced that Apple has like some release that just suddenly slows everyone else's phones down so that we're convinced we need the new one. What this is this is the trap of comparison. That what I have, though it was fine just a little bit ago, when compared to what someone else is doing or what someone else has, it's no longer satisfactory. One author defined comparison this way. Comparison is determining where I'm at based on where everyone else is. Determining where I'm at based on where everyone else is. Now, let me start right off this morning by showing you the comparison is dangerous. Why? Let me show you why it's an issue that we must guard our hearts from. It's dangerous, first of all, because it robs us of our joy. When you're in the Chick-fil-A lane and you're about to get Chick-fil-A, you should be excited. Chicken is about to be there. Why would you be upset? Somebody got it just a couple moments sooner than you did. Perhaps you've heard the quote, Mark Twain said, comparison is the death of joy. Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is a thief of joy. Maybe you've heard one of those. And we resonate with that. We know it to be true. Because we are fine until we compare with someone else. And suddenly what we have, our phone, our checkout lane, our speed on the highway, is not enough because of what someone else has. And comparison will always rob us of contentment, always kill our joy, because there will always be a faster lane, a faster car, a faster phone. There will always be better seats, nicer clothes, newer cars, smoother coffee, fitter people, younger people, taller people. There will always be someone that you could compare yourself to. And think about the incredibly high standard you're setting for your happiness if the only way you can be happy is if you're the best or the most. You can only be content if you have the fastest or the best in the whole world. That means that there is only going to be one person who can be content with that one thing. And even if they have the best, the fastest in that category, there'll be a different category where someone else is better than them. Comparison is dangerous because it robs us of our joy. And comparison is dangerous because it causes us to covet. It causes us to envy those who have what we want, who have it better than what we have. And from the very beginning, this has been a problem for mankind. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were given an entire garden full of beautiful trees, full of fruits. And what did they desire? The one they couldn't have. The one they didn't have. And the Ten Commandments, as God is taking His people out of slavery in Egypt, and He's going to establish them in a promised land where they'll have farms that they didn't build, houses they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant. They're going to have all of this wonderful stuff. He has to include in the 10 basic rules for how they'll conduct themselves, don't covet after your neighbor's fill in the blank. Don't covet after your neighbor's wife. Don't covet after your neighbor's house. Don't covet after your neighbor's vineyard. Don't covet after your neighbor's livestock. He's just rescued these people from slavery. They had nothing. And God is going to give them everything, yet they will still fall prey to the temptation of desiring what someone else has that they don't have. It's no wonder that people who win the lottery, studies have shown this, people who win the lottery 6 months after they win the lottery, they're no happier than they were 6 months before they win the lottery. Sure, they're excited when they win. And they're excited for the first few months when they're spending a lot of money, buying things that they've wanted. But eventually that settles down and comparison will rob them of their excitement and happiness too. Because even when you win the lottery, there's someone who has more than you, who has nicer things than you, who has a bigger house than you. There's a really good example of this in Scripture in John 21. And to appreciate what's happening in this passage, you've got to know the context. Jesus has just recently raised from the dead. And just before His death, Peter, one of His closest disciples, tries to die for his faith. A whole garrison comes to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out a sword and is ready to take on everybody. Peter's the kind of guy like, I don't care how many there are, I'm fighting. And he pulls out his sword, and not only does he pull out his sword, he's not just saber rattling, he's not just talking a big game. He swings it at a guy, and he takes his ear off. And Jesus says, Peter, calm down. That's not what we're doing right now. He picks up the man's ear, and he restores it. Here Peter is willing to take on all of these guards. Jesus says, no, right now. That's not what we're doing. Jesus goes to trial, and at the trial, Peter is standing outside, and people begin to say, hey, aren't you one of Jesus' followers? You see, Peter was willing to die for Jesus, but he found it harder to live for Jesus. And Peter said, no, I don't know the guy. And 3 times he denies that he even knows Jesus. And when he recognizes what he's done, he is so ashamed, he's so full of regret, that he goes out and he weeps all night, Scripture tells us. Jesus is crucified. He's dead for 3 days. He raises again. Everyone is excited, but Peter is still feeling angst about this thing that he has done. And so Jesus comes to him in John 21, and there's this powerful back and forth. Well, Jesus asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? And he's communicating to Peter, I know what you did. I know you denied me 3 times. I'm giving you the opportunity to affirm your love for me 3 times. I know what you did, but it's okay. I love you anyway. And I still got a plan for your life. So looking at John 21, let's pick up reading right at the end of this exchange in verse 17. He said to him, Jesus said to him the 3rd time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, do you love me? It all clicked in this moment. Peter knows what it is that Jesus is communicating. He said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. There's a lot in those words. You know all things. Jesus, you've seen what I've done. But you know that I love you in spite of what I've done. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And this command that Jesus gives Peter is one that he'll live out. We know that in the remainder of the New Testament, Peter would go to proclaim the gospel. He would preach at Pentecost. But then Jesus gives Peter a prophecy of what his life is going to look like. In verse 18, most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, You will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." Jesus tells Peter, "Peter, you're eventually going to get the opportunity to do what you tried to do in the garden the night I was arrested. You're going to have the opportunity to be arrested and to be killed for your faith." And this is just this powerful moment. Peter has been welcomed back to the fold. He's been told, you're going to be given this great responsibility to feed the sheep. You're going to stand strong, Peter. The next time the challenge comes, you're not going to fail the test. You're going to say that you know me. You're going to proclaim my name in front of everyone, no matter what it costs you. But then look what happens in verse 20. Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at supper and said, "Lord, who is the one who betrays you?" This is speaking of John, the writer of this gospel. Peter, seeing John, said to Jesus, "But Lord, what about John? What about this man?" And Jesus said to him, "If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? Follow me." Peter's had this powerful moment with Jesus. He's been restored. He's been told that he's going to follow through. And Peter says, "Okay, thanks, Jesus, but what about John? What's going to happen to him? What about him?" Jesus says, "What is that to you, Peter? Follow me." And what we have here in this passage is this example of Jesus will do this powerful work in our lives. He will save us even though we have turned our back on Him, rejected Him. He will give us this future that we can look forward to with hope. But then we'll look over at someone else and say, "Well, what about them? What about them?" And the danger of comparison is that it draws our eyes off of God onto others. Peter's got this powerful moment with Jesus, this back and forth, they're talking. And what does he do in this moment? He turns around and he looks at someone else. Husbands, just a pro tip here. I figured out that when your wife is speaking to you, it's best to maintain eye contact. No matter what's going on in the game, right? Or what funny meme your friend just sent you, just stay locked in. Your life will be better for it, I promise you. Peter's having this powerful moment with Jesus and he's distracted. And he looks at John. What about John? And I think this is a good passage for us to consider this morning because I believe that many of us, Jesus has done a powerful work in our lives. He has a calling for us. He has a work He wants to do in us, but we are too busy looking around. Peter turning around and seeing John. Listen, we're not called to stay ahead of others. And we're not called to worry about everyone else. We are called to follow Jesus. And I fear that while accountability and growing in grace with fellow believers is clearly very effective and something that Jesus wanted His disciples to do, I wonder if sometimes we don't hold one another back because once we start to make some strides in the Christian life, we think, well, maybe I'm overdoing it. Because other people don't seem to be getting this serious. Did you know that every person who has done a great thing for God, every person who has got incredibly serious and seen revival break out in their life, in their church, in their community, every one of them had friends who said, you know what, you're taking this all a little bit too serious. You're going a little overboard. Don't you think you're overdoing it? Most Christians don't get this serious. Most Christians don't post about Jesus all the time. When Bonhoeffer returned to Germany during the upswing of Nazism, And he established the confessing church. He established a seminary, a place where people could be trained to lead the church in this incredibly difficult time. To do so, they had to go out into like farmland and basically be an underground seminary. It was a secret seminary. And while he's doing this, he's at this place. One of his friends comes to visit him to tell him, Dietrich, I think you're kind of overdoing it. You're overdoing it. This is all a little too much. And there's this powerful moment in Bonhoeffer's life where he takes that friend who's telling me that he's overdoing it, and he says, get in the boat with me. And they cross this river and they go up to the top of the hill. And from that hill, they can see an airport where Hitler has been mustering troops and planes and tanks. And he says, I'm taking it this serious because this, pointing back to the seminary, must be stronger than that. This must be stronger than that. Listen, for us to live out the calling that God has given us is not to just be average. The world, the flesh, and the devil is not worried about being average. It's worried about doing what is most effective to wreck our lives and our families and our churches. Let's not worry about what everybody else is doing and whether or not we're just kind of status quo. Let's worry about what God has called us to do and to be. And if we do that, this will be stronger than that. Don't determine if you're following Christ too closely based on what everyone else is doing. Follow Christ. Close the distance between you and Him. Don't worry about the distance between you and others. Whether you're too far back or too far ahead, only focus on Him. Listen, even though our heart is desperately wicked and denied God, Jesus has come to us and offered us grace. He's acknowledged our sin like He did Peter's and forgiven us in spite of it. And He's invited us into a unique calling to live out His life. This is beautiful. This is wonderful. Why would we take our eyes off of Jesus? Comparison is dangerous because it takes our eyes off of Jesus. Comparison is dangerous because it draws us out of our lane. We move where we're looking. When I was a boy, my dad taught me to mow the lawn. He told me, if you look down at the line that you're making, it'll be crooked. If you look over to the side or over this way, it'll be crooked. But if you just look at a point fixed straight ahead and just walk towards it, it'll be a straight line. Just look straight ahead and walk towards that. You'll make a straight line. If we live our lives looking in the other lane and looking at what other people are doing, we'll eventually drift into that lane. And we'll also let our foot off the gas. How many times have you seen that moment in the Olympics where someone is running well, but then they look over their shoulder to see where everyone else is at and they falter? They lose a step, perhaps even lose the race. God has a calling, a path for you. What does it matter what someone else's path is? Jesus says, Peter, if I will that John never dies, what is that to you? Follow me. What does it matter what John's life is going to look like? Follow me. God has a path and a calling for you just like He did for Peter, just like He did for John. He knows everything about your life, your background, your details. He knows all of that. And He has a life that only you can live. He has a way that only you can fit into the grand masterpiece that He is building in His kingdom. God made you to be you, a restored, redeemed, sanctified you, but still you. God didn't give you a fingerprint that is unlike anyone else's in the entire world and DNA that can't be matched to anyone else's in the entire world. And He didn't catalog how many hairs are on your head or aren't on your head for you to be like someone else. He called you to be you. He didn't call you to be like me. He didn't call you to be like someone else. He didn't call you to be like that person on Instagram who seems to have it all together. He didn't call you to be like that person at work that you look up to, or you wish that you had their car, or you wish that you had their hair, or you wish that you had their life. He called you to be you, a redeemed, rescued, sanctified version of you, following Jesus as close as possible. And when you do that, when you run in your lane, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. God made you to be you. Peter wasn't called to live John's life, and John wasn't called to live Peter's life. They had different destinies. And there was a reason for that. There's a really good example of this in Israel's history. 1 Samuel chapter 8 tells us that the people, they come to Samuel from this point where God has established the kingdom. He's rescued them from slavery. He's established them in a kingdom. They've had judges who rule over them. And the power is more localized and more spread out among these judges who lead the people. And it comes time to name new judges, to name new leaders. And Samuel names his sons, and they're not up to the job. And so they meet to name some different leaders. And the people tell Samuel, we don't want more judges. We are tired of judges. We want a king. And Samuel goes to God in prayer. Samuel's very disappointed that this is what they want to do. He goes to God in prayer, and God says, Samuel, don't take it personally. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. They're rejecting my plan. You see, God had ordained that Israel be unlike any other nation. God said, Samuel, go back and talk to them. Tell them that they can do this, but it's not going to work out great for them. Tell them that this king, he's going to want taxes, that he's going to act like a sovereign, he's going to do what he wants. They're not going to be able to stop him because he's the king. So Samuel goes back, and he tells them this, and this is what they say in response in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 19 and 20. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. And listen to verse 20. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. Israel was built to be a nation like no other. They were founded like no other nation. God had given them this land, the promised land. But what did they wanted to be like everybody else. They wanted a king because everybody else has got a king. We kind of feel left out. We don't have a king. And they say, Samuel, if we have a king, he'll lead us and he'll go and he'll fight our battles for us. And just read the rest of Israel's history. It does not go well. Even with God choosing the kings, they're corrupted. And every one of them fails in some way. Some are better than others. Some are absolutely horrible and wicked. And this is not what God designed them to be. Not what God designed them to do. And just as Israel was built to be a nation like no other, you are called to be a saint like no other. And we would do well not to compare ourselves to the lifestyles of the world, because God didn't call us to live those lives. He called us to live a completely different life. Listen, this is one of the reasons that I love Growth Track, because Growth Track, the week that happened just right now, week 3, we help people find their spiritual gift, to help them find their place where they can make a difference in the kingdom of God. Because we believe that every believer has a spiritual gift, that Romans 12 teaches us that when we put our faith in Christ, we are endued with the spiritual gift to make a difference in the world. And we want everyone here to know what their spiritual gift is so that you can make that impact in the world. God has a unique calling and purpose for your life, but if you're too busy looking at what other people are doing, you're not staying in your lane. You're drifting into what other people expect you to do. God has a different destination for you. This world is not our home. We are just passing through. If God has a different destination for us, why would we want to follow the path that everyone else is on? Now, this is hard. This is hard because comparison is incredibly appealing. It's all around us. We do it all of the time. We almost don't even know how to give someone a compliment or praise something without using comparative language, right? Go eat some tacos this afternoon. They're really good. What are you going to say? These are the best. Are they really the best? I mean, are they the best in the entire world? Or are you just really hungry right now because Pastor Daniel preached long? Someone does something you don't like, they're the worst, right? Are they the worst? Or do they just annoy you? This book is the best book I've ever read. Is it the best book you've ever read, or is it just the best book about that particular subject that you've read in the last 6 months? Comparison is appealing because it's incredibly common. We use it all the time. And also, it can be helpful if correctly applied. It can be useful if we're doing it in the right way. We can use it as a tool to learn, gain some insight. If we compare experiences in group, we talk about some struggle that we've had, we most likely can find some similarities and a way to overcome. We can help one another. You know, when I faced that, this is what I did, and this is how God helped me. That's healthy comparison. There's also ways for us to kind of figure out, okay, I'm on track here. Do you remember when you had kids and you took them to the doctor and they would say, oh, your kid is in the 26th percentile for height and weight and 50th percentile for their head? I don't know why we measure their head separately, but we do. Right? And every time we'd go, they'd tell me that my kids were in the very low percentile. If you've seen my wife, you understand why that is. They were always really low for their height and weight, and then really high for their head, because they got their big head from me. Thank God they grew into it. I didn't really understand why they told us the percentile, and now I know that they're telling you like, oh, your child is here, and as they grow, if they stay among that percentile, it means that they're progressing like most children progress, and there's no health concerns that we have to worry about. But as competitive as I am, I turned it into something else. Like, yeah, baby, 35th percentile, passing up all those other kids. Let's go. It's supposed to be a tool to show how your child progresses and they grow, and I made a competition out of it. Why? Because I didn't know how to use that comparative tool healthy. Because it's all around us. You might be struggling with comparison, you don't even know it. So let me give you some signs or some tells. One, you constantly scroll social media, comparing your life to the carefully curated highlights of what you see on screen. You know what you're doing? You're comparing your behind-the-scenes footage with their highlight reel. They didn't post all of the hard things. They posted the best moment. Listen, we show photos here at the church. We post photos here at the church. We don't show every one of the photos. You're welcome, okay? Because if we did, half of them is your face like in the middle of a laugh or something along those lines, right? We take the moment where you're smiling. That's the curated, highlighted moment. And everybody's doing the exact same thing. One, you're constantly scrolling social media, comparing your life to others. Two, you have feelings of inadequacy. You feel like you don't measure up. Measure up to what? God's called you to be you and to run in your lane. And the only tool I know to measure in that lane is Jesus. And Jesus, while we don't measure up to him, it says, I love you. And I want you. At my table. On my team. In this calling. 3, negative self-talk. How do you talk to yourself? If you talk to yourself in such a way that if you talk to other people that way, we'd stop you, you got negative self-talk. Jealousy and envy, covetousness. You're envious of someone else's success or happiness. 5, you avoid challenges. You pull away from opportunities to show how well you could do because you're afraid of that you won't measure up to what other people have done. 6, you're constantly seeking approval because you don't feel that you measure up. You're constantly looking for any type of way to get some approval from someone. 7, you're overreactive to criticism. You feel upset and defensive when someone criticizes you. Even if it's small, even if it's constructive, even if they're just trying to be helpful. 8, you withdraw socially. Because you're afraid of criticism, because you're afraid of not measuring up. You withdraw, you come into yourself. You don't want to put yourself out there. 9, you have unrealistic expectations for yourself, or maybe you have perfectionism. That it has to be absolutely right, absolutely perfect all the time. Or 10, you're aggressive if you feel disrespected. Because your ego has become so fragile in comparison to others all the time, you feel this need to protect it viciously, fiercely. How do we overcome this? We overcome comparison with celebration. We recognize and celebrate what God has done. Peter, what does it matter what's going to happen with John? I just saved you. Peter, what does it matter what's going to happen with John? I just rose from the dead and called you to still be a part of my core team. Celebrate that. Don't worry about what's going on with him. Celebrate that. Russell Johnson, who's a pastor in outside of Seattle, Washington, he told the story. He was an associate pastor at a church, and I think he led the young adults or something. And he asked his older pastor, "Can we have a Super Bowl party?" And the pastor said, "Yeah, you can have a Super Bowl party, but it's got to be a church service. So y'all can watch the Super Bowl." And I mean, this is possible on the West Coast. You know, they watch the Super Bowl. Then after, you got to have a worship service and you got to preach. He said, "Okay, we'll do that." And they planned it. Well, that year, the Seattle Seahawks went to the Super Bowl and they won. And Russell Johnson got up on stage. Everybody's pumped. We just won the Super Bowl. He's like, I could have said whatever. Everybody's like, man, this is amazing, wonderful, awesome. And then the very next year, they do it again. Like, let's run this back. This worked out great. And that was the year that the Seahawks came within 1 yard of winning, and they lost. He said, then I had to get up on stage and preach after that. He said, I felt like when Jesus was up there and like, give us Barabbas, kill this guy. Nobody was excited. We just lost. Nothing was different. The team was still good. They came 1 yard short. They'd made it to the Super Bowl. Most teams didn't even make it to the Super Bowl. They had won a Super Bowl the year before. But they came 1 yard short, and it just changed the complete atmosphere. God has done miracles in your life. He has saved you from yourself. It is a miracle that you are alive and breathing. It's a miracle that you were born. The fact that you are here right now with the ability to hear and understand my voice is a miracle all on its own. And yet what happens is we lose sight of the miracle because of the one little yard that didn't get there. The one little piece of the puzzle that's missing. The one little thing that we're convinced we need that we don't even really need. Because God didn't call us to that. God called us to this. And instead of comparing what we could have or what we want to have, we should be celebrating what we do have. Celebrating what God has done. Celebrate what God has done for you. And secondly, celebrate what God does for others. It's a whole lot harder to compare, well, why don't I have that if you're so busy celebrating? God gave you that. I remember years ago, Nicole and I, we went on a trip for our 10th anniversary. And, just what I had experienced in the past, every time somebody would like, oh, where are you guys going? And I would tell them, and they'd be like, well, it must be nice, And I almost came to this point where like I hated to tell people, like, yeah, we're going to Key West for a week. No kids. It's going to be awesome, Because people would be like, boy, I wish I could do that, But I remember telling Ron Hunter, we were in Nashville, we were going to fly out the next day to go this, and I had a meeting, and he's like, oh, so where are you going? I was like, we're going to Key West. And he goes, man, that is awesome. Good for you, Daniel. And I just remember him being like, I want to be that. Like, oh, that is awesome. God did that for you. That's great you get to do that. Celebrate what God has done in the lives of others. Today's Tailgate Sunday. The majority of the time you go tailgating, you're outside of the stadium before the game, and there's the other team, and they're tailgating, and only one of you gets to walk out winners. And it's a little bit harder to celebrate if they win, right? But friend, we might be wearing sports gear, and this might be Tailgate Sunday, but we're not in a win-lose proposition here. All of us get to win. We all get to win. Jesus can save all of us. God doing something good in my life doesn't mean that it can't happen in your life. God doing something in your life doesn't mean that it can't happen in my life. God can do good in our lives, all of our lives, and He does. We all get to win. Peter and John both get to worship Jesus and praise Him. They both get to be a part of His team. And the same is true for us today. It should be easier for us than anyone else in the world to celebrate what God's doing for others, because He's doing it for all of us. We all not just get to be on the winning team, we are on the winning team. How do we overcome comparison? Celebrate. Celebrate what God has done in your life and the lives of others. Every Sunday should be like we just won the Super Bowl. Every Monday morning, we should wake up 1st and 10, ready to go for another week, because God has blessed us. He's done so much in our lives. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer.